Okay, so here we are on the first lesson of the Germany course. So we'll do a little bit of context as always, some background before we get into this course. So it's worth 30% overall of your whole GCSE and is the third paper. It lasts an hour and 20 minutes and it's a mixture of knowledge and interpretations and sources. Okay, so before we do anything, I think it'd be a good idea for you to just think about what you do know about the Nazis and about Germany. So just pause this video and then make a list of as many things as you can about what we know from Key Stage 3 or just generally what you know anyway. Okay, so give yourself as long as you need for this bit and then we'll carry on. Okay, so I suppose some of the things you've thought about are the Holocaust, 6 million Jews, Hitler being a painter, Germany lost the war, maybe some German weapons perhaps. There's all sorts that you might have. That was just a bit of an idea really, and if you didn't know much then that's okay because you're going to find out lots more during this course. Okay, so that first little activity was alright, I think. Hopefully you got a bit of an idea of some of the key bits of the Nazis, and you do remember a little bit from Key Stage 3 as well. So let's get cracking on this. Okay, so we're going to try and establish what we know and summarise the impact really of World War I on Germany and the German people. This is quite important, and all the way through this Germany course we'll see that it comes back to the end of World War I with lots of people, particularly those on the right, Hitler amongst others, they felt angry. They felt that they hadn't lost the war and they'd been robbed and various things like that. So we're going to try and figure that out. And the two people we can see on the screen at the moment, they're quite important. Certainly at the start of the Germany course in 1918. Okay, so Kaiser Wilhelm II is the leader of Germany. So he is a monarch, he's a king. So Kaiser, if he was in English, this would be King William II. So Kaiser Wilhelm II, he's the one in charge of Germany during the war. And as I'm sure you can imagine, the guy on the right is going to replace him. He is called Friedrich Ebert. He becomes the first leader of Germany after the war. And we'll go through this in this session now. Okay, well, they both look thrilled to bits to be there, don't they? Alright, so let's get moving through this World War I story. So here's a little picture of the Kaiser, and one of the main things that happen as a result of World War I is that the king abdicates. So this word in red that you can see on the screen is really important. We've got to be using this kind of language in our exam, in our answers. Okay, so the Kaiser abdicates. What that means is he steps down, he gives up his throne, he's no longer the king of Germany. Germany no longer has a king. Okay, now obviously that's going to leave a massive hole because there's always been a monarch in Germany. They've always been one of the most powerful empires in Europe, in lots of different areas. Sometimes they were part of a bigger empire, sometimes they were in charge of their own empires, and obviously that's the main reason why World War I happened, was that Germany was trying to build an empire that would rival the British Empire. So anyway, here we are, the 9th of November 1918. The Kaiser abdicates, and I don't suppose you think to yourself, he does this through choice. Why would a king do that? So perhaps just have a little think to yourself, what reasons might there be for the monarch of Germany to abdicate, to step down, to give up his throne? Alright, maybe pause for a second before we move on and have a little think about that. It's not the normal thing to do, is it, that a king just says, oh, okay then, I give up. So this is an important twist in the tale, really. So that's the 9th of November, okay, 2 days before the end of World War I. That's quite useful to keep in mind as well. Alright, so he steps down, he's abdicated, and we need to try and think of some of those reasons why. Okay, so the main issue really is that by 1918 Germany was absolutely smashed. It was struggling at home and in the trenches of World War I. 2 million soldiers had died, 5 million casualties. That's a huge impact on Germany and the Germans, particularly for those people who had their wives and children at home as well, and they were also trying to pick up the war effort, just like they were in Britain with the women when they stepped up and they drove the buses and trams and things like that. As well as that, the Allies, us, we blockaded the ports, which starved the Germans even more. 500,000, 500,000 Germans were starving due to us blockading the ports. So really, in Germany, you've got to try and imagine this absolute chaos. And in the end, the people turned on Kaiser Wilhelm II, and that's really why he abdicated. That's why he stepped down. Germany was in so much debt from World War I, £37 billion worth of debt, which completely bankrupted Germany. As we go through the story in the next couple of sessions, you'll see that as a punishment for the war, we asked them to pay £6.6 billion reparations or compensation on top of that debt. So you can imagine there's going to be lots of people in Germany who aren't very happy with that, but we'll come to that later. All right, so as I say, most people blame the king. They blame the Kaiser for the state of Germany. It was really worrying as well because just a year earlier in Russia, the Tsar, so the Russian name for king, the Tsar Nicholas II, he had his throne taken from him in the Russian Revolution of 1917. The whole family, you may have heard the story of Anastasia. That whole family, they had their throne taken off them. They were all murdered, brutally actually. And there's a communist revolution in Russia. So this kind of thing has already happened in recent times. So the German people, and maybe the king, recognised that, and that might be a reason why he stepped down rather than being taken down. As it was, he fled to Holland anyway, and got away with that one. The revolution was bubbling in Germany, and he abdicates. So he's replaced by this guy, Friedrich Ebert, on the 10th of November. So that's just the next day. He's the leader of the Social Democrat Party. All right, so he is the new leader of this new Weimar Republic. Now, a republic, if you remember from Key Stage 3 from Year 7 particularly, a republic is a country that doesn't have a king or queen. So Germany no longer has a king or queen. So instead, it has a new political system that we'll look at in the next session. And Ebert becomes its first chancellor. Now, he obviously has an awful lot to deal with. And that possibly explains the picture that you can see in front of you. He's not happy, but he gives it his best shot, and you either love Ebert or you don't. And as the story develops, you'll see why. So now Germany, for the first time in its history, is a democracy. That means that people have a say. They can vote for their leaders going forward. So just an interesting fact, really, why it's called the Weimar Republic is because it was established or created in a place in Germany called Weimar. As we've seen earlier, and you're going to see in a minute, the country, Germany, is in a state, particularly Berlin, the capital. So it was just too dangerous to do anything political or sensible in Berlin. So they moved to a quieter region of Germany, and in Weimar was where the politicians came up with this new Weimar Republic. Okay, are you happy with that? So Ebert, the new chancellor, so effectively that's like the Prime Minister in England, but not quite Prime Minister, but similar to that role. He has taken over from the king, and the first thing he's going to do, if you know anything about World War I, and hopefully you do, you think about all those remembrance days and poppy days that we've had all the way through school, is the 11th of November. Okay, what happened on the 11th of November? Have a little think before we move on. Yeah, the Armistice Day, so Poppy Day, when we remember the end of the war. That is what he does first. Before we get on to that, this, if you're using your book or you've got some paper, is a useful way to set up the next little bit of this session. So a little mind map, and as we go through each of these sections, you can add some further notes to it. Some of which are important. I'll tell you which ones are more important than others. Some of it is just, as I say, context. So in the top right-hand corner, you can see it's a pretty grim picture if you can make it out. This is actually carcasses, animal carcasses in the streets. The situation was so dire during this war that people, it's been reported or suggested that people raided Berlin Zoo and killed the animals and ate some of the animals as well. That's just how desperate they were. So just to give you a bit of a flavour really of the situation in Germany after World War I, It's really important that we understand why people are angry. And then as we go through the rest of the story, we can keep coming back to remember the state that these people were in after World War One. Okay, so we're going to start and we're going to work our way around these headings, and you can make some notes as we go. Remember, if you need to, just press pause and add some notes from the screen or things that I'm telling you. Okay, so the first thing to be thinking about is the impact of the war. So the death and the injury, we've sort of already mentioned that there were 7 million casualties and deaths together, so 2 million people died. The home fronts, again, briefly we've mentioned about the state in Germany, at home in Germany, the starvation and things like that, and this led to the revolution. We're going to meet, or for the first time see some of Germany's military dictators, so they're leaders of their army. As this whole story develops, some of them will pop back up later on in the Germany course. The Ludendorff Offensive, for those of you that are into your World War I tactics and battles, you might know a little bit about that, but we'll briefly talk about that in a second. And then finally, the German surrender. Now, the Germans do surrender. They do give up. And that is the foundation of why the Nazi Party grows, and some right-wing, extreme right-wing members of Germany, people in Germany, they never quite got over this German surrender, which we'll have a look at as we go. Okay, you ready? Okay, remember just to pause things if you need to write things down if I'm going too fast. Okay, so the first set of facts that we can think about is the death and injury. Now, we know the scale of this in Britain. We learn about this in Key Stage 3. But don't forget, Germany, they were also suffering exactly the same situation as we were. Okay, so they had 10.7 million conscripts. A conscript is people who were forced to sign up, forced to go to war. 60% of those were casualties. That's a lot. And of course, the 2 million deaths. Now, that can have a psychological and emotional impact as well as a physical impact, particularly if the husbands and their sons and their fathers aren't coming home, just like what happened in Britain. 2.7 million permanently disabled. So when they did go home, they couldn't do the things that they used to do. They were disabled, so they lost their jobs, and the government, or the country, would obviously have to look after them, which is more cost, particularly when you think how bankrupt Germany is from this war. We've already talked, haven't we, of that £37 billion cost of this war. 500,000 widows at home, adding to the anger and the sadness back in Germany. And sadly, even last little point on this is there's 1 million orphans. So 1 million people, children, who have no parents for whatever reason. So this just gives you just a little idea about the scale of the sadness and the anger, and just how awful this war has impacted Germany, like it impacted everybody else. A horrible, horrible war. Okay, so you can add some of these things to your death and injury section of your little mind map. Just press pause and then copy those down. This is just some information. If you can remember some of those facts, then that'll be fantastic. If not, you'll be able to explain the idea and the reason why people looked for change or were angry. These are some of the key facts for that. Okay, so if we move on to life at home, the home front of Germany. Okay, so just like in Britain, the absence of the men meant the women had to step up. So those people that were left in Germany, they had to do the jobs that used to be done by the men. Okay, so driving buses, trams, working in the factories, making munitions and clothes and all those kinds of things. The women stepped up in Germany and they did that job. Most of the farms in Germany by 1917, so halfway through the war, were run by women. So they really were doing a great job, just like the women were in Britain as well. Although this was working out as best as possible, the prices rose. This is called inflation. All right, when there's not enough of anything or food, the prices go up, particularly food normally. So there's not enough food being made, and as a result, the demand goes up, and therefore the price goes up. So things at home are more expensive, and people aren't getting paid any more money, so they're struggling. They're not able to buy as much food as they need to feed their children or their families. Again, adding to a little bit of the stress that's going on in Germany. So wages go up by 2, but the price of everything else goes up by 4. So for example, if a Mars bar cost 20 pence yesterday. Okay, so it's now 80 pence, but you have only got a 40 pence increase in your pay. So to buy that Mars bar is literally 4 times as much as it was yesterday, but you haven't got that much money. Okay, it's a bit of a silly example of Mars bar, really. Maybe a loaf would have been better, because they're the kind of staple foods that people need to eat. The point is, the people in Germany were poorer and the cost of things had gone up. So the government, as happened in Britain during World War II and generally happens when there's this kind of problem, rationing was introduced. Now, rationing means people are only allowed a certain amount of food, usually small amounts of food. People might get used to it, but it certainly means a change in lifestyle, perhaps, if you have never had to worry about how much you eat before. Okay, and again, remember that the food is not being produced in the first place. Then, to make things worse, the potato harvest in 1916, well, it failed. Okay, so people rely on potatoes. It is a staple of most people, especially when times are tough. A potato and wheat and bread become what we eat, and the harvests failed, adding to the problem that was already there. People were now starving. All right, this was terrible at home. And now, I mentioned earlier, you might remember, that we are going to, when I say we, I mean the Allies, we are going to make this a whole lot worse, because we're going to blockade all ports. So the German people, the German leaders, can't actually import food either, adding to this 500,000 people starving. All right, so the 150 billion marks, the German currency, is the 37 billion pounds that we've talked about, the debt from the war. Hopefully from this page and from what I'm telling you, you can get a bit of an idea just how extreme and how awful it was in Germany. All right, and then we get to this point here, this British naval blockade. So 500,000 people starved, 750,000 people starving altogether. So probably more deaths and more people very, very poorly in a total, thanks to the actions of the British. Now, we are trying to win a war, so I guess the idea there is if we can make the people at home turn on their leaders and their government, it might force them to end the war. Good tactics, and I think actually this proved quite important in the decision for Kaiser Wilhelm to abdicate, although he was pretty stubborn and he kept fighting and fighting and fighting. So the home front, life in Germany during this war, was just as bad as life in the trenches for the German soldiers as well. Okay, so you can add some of that if you need to, and some of the other bits that I've said. So the German Revolution, it's no surprise, it shouldn't be a surprise to you, that all of that has led to a German Revolution. Similar to the Russian Revolution, except the fact that we haven't removed the monarchy, although if he didn't step down or abdicate himself, I'm sure it would have happened. So from within, Germany is crumbling. There is 300,000 Berliners, the capital, remember, they go on strike because there's not enough bread. All right. Don't forget that while this is happening, over in France on the Western Front, there is the trenches, World War One. So all of that horror that we've learned in the trenches course, in Germany, they're having a whole other battle, just as important and just as damaging. All right. Once Berlin started to strike, there were strikes all around the country. The whole of Germany had strikes. Okay, so in July 1917, the government, the Reichstag, so that's their parliament, we'll meet the Reichstag shortly when we write this as a key word, their parliament, so like our Houses of Parliament, House of Commons and House of Lords, their Reichstag, they voted for immediate peace. Now you'll see that was in July 1917, and it didn't happen, did it, until November 1918, but at least the German government seemed to recognise that this was a problem. Okay, it was clear at this point, no matter what happens with the Armistice, that by July the king had to go. Do you agree? Do you think it's his fault? Could he have ended the war? Could he have given up earlier? Or was he just being brave? Was he doing what a king was supposed to do? Either way, there was a revolution. Okay, and pretty much it was the top people, as always, who suffer. So the power was in the hands of the military leaders, Hindenburg and Ludendorff. So this guy here, Hindenburg, he is going to be really important. He is the one who, in 1933, gives Hitler the chancellorship, makes Hitler chancellor. Now that is quite a long way away in our story, but he despises Hitler. But somehow between now and then, we're going to tell the story where Hitler becomes the chancellor. Okay, so it's Hindenburg who does that later on. Ludendorff is a famous German leader. He's a great leader. The people of Germany, they love him. He's brave. He plays a little part of the story soon as well. He comes back in 1923 to try and help Hitler take over Germany. It's a bit of a disaster, really, but that's where he comes back on the scene. All right. So Germany continues to fight under these great men. They're brave. They're just heroes. And then April 1917, the Americans join the war. Now, the Americans haven't been in the war. It's nothing to do with them until the Germans sink a American ship that had American civilians on it. Okay, and obviously the Americans were very unhappy with that, so they joined the war. And when Germany are in the state that they're in, and they're suffering in the Western Front, obviously the pressures come off a little bit from the Eastern Front because of the Russian Revolution. But when this powerhouse, this massive power like America joins the war, I think you can imagine that it is pretty much game over. And that goes on to be proven the war is over very, very quickly after this. All right, but not to be forgotten, this Ludendorff Offensive, the last chance, the last fight, the last throw of the dice for the Germans, is they attempt one more attack in March 1918. So this is not really that relevant for your exam. However, it's very useful to give you a bit of an idea of the people, the attitude of the Germans and how hard they believed and were willing to fight. Despite the fact that they were losing and it was going bad, they still were determined to fight on. And this attitude, you'll see over the next few sessions, really does show itself in the extremes of politics, and which is why we see the rise of the Nazi Party. So they nearly take Paris and they suffer 800,000 casualties. It nearly works. However, the soldiers began to desert. This desertion increased, and as well as the American counterattack and the Allies, the Ludendorff Offensive failed. Okay, these 1 million troops pushed them back, and it was the failure of the Ludendorff Offensive which effectively ended the Germans' hopes of winning the war. Although Ludendorff and everybody else, they continued to say that we were winning. So everybody back home still believed, although they were suffering, that Germany was winning this war. So I've asked the question there, why was the Russian Revolution important? We've talked about that already, haven't we? That Kaiser Wilhelm maybe in the back of his mind thought, oh, something similar could happen here in Germany. Who knows? So all in all, the Germans' last throw of the dice was a complete failure, and this leads to the surrender that we've already just talked about. So everybody suffers defeat. Austria, Bulgaria, the end of the Ottoman Empire shortly after this, it just completely crumbles, and that's partly because of desertions and mutinies within the armies, but they were just losing and their morale had gone. It was just time to call it quits, because the suffering we've seen in Germany was also happening in Austria, in Hungary, in Bulgaria. Austria-Hungary, just to note, were won at this point. All right, so the Kaiser appoints a civilian government, still not quite willing to let go of the power, the reins of power. Ludendorff flees to Sweden wearing a false beard. But again, he's alive. He saves his life by fleeing to Sweden. And the German Navy, one more attack on the British Navy, and they suffer what's called the Kiel Mutiny. The German sailors just give up. At this point, Kaiser Wilhelm II now knows he's lost the support of his country. He's lost the support of his army. There is no turning back. And this is where our story begins to see our steps to the abdication and then, of course, the Armistice. So German towns and cities take over themselves. They start running the show. Sailors and soldiers continue to desert and fight back. And then, as we've mentioned previously at the start of this session, the 9th of November, Kaiser Wilhelm abdicates. That means, remember, to step down. He has no choice. On the 10th of November, Ebert is the new head of government. And then the probably most famous date of all, the 11th of November 1918, the German armed forces surrendered. They give up, they sign the Armistice, and as you know, the Armistice came into effect at 11 o'clock on the 11th of November 1918. Okay, so that is effectively the context and the background to the war. Now this armistice, as you can see on the screen, was not popular. And it was not popular for many reasons. Most importantly though, most Germans felt they were actually winning the war, particularly those at home. So they felt that they'd been stabbed in the back by Ebert. And this stabbed in the back myth is going to play a huge part as our story develops. Okay, the German word for this is Dolchstoß, but we'll see that shortly. All right, so the war is over. Now Ebert has done the first thing, which was to end the war, short term. He's got to go home now and he's got to sort out the political chaos in the country. The sadness, the anger, the famine, the starvation, the bankruptcy, all of these things. Now, just before we do move on, I just want you to have a little thought, a little think for a minute about Ebert and what chance has he got. Do you think Ebert is going to be able to turn this situation around? Now remember, Hitler does not become Chancellor until 1933. Okay, so that's 15 years away. That's what we've got to get through the next 15 years. At this point though, does Ebert stand the chance of sorting out the problems in Germany as a result of World War I? Okay, have a little think to yourself and then we'll move on. All right, so part of the exam, part of the thing, two of the main things you need to do in this paper is work with interpretations. Now they're a little bit different from sources. We don't need to analyse how useful an interpretation is. The interpretations in this Germany paper, they are usually a modern historian who has a view about the events that we're learning about. It could be about Hitler's attempts to take power in 1923. It could be the Treaty of Versailles. Whatever it is, you'll have two views, two interpretations. And actually the question types, what we have to do with it, it's not overly that difficult. You need to be able to read and understand and have a little think about what's going on. So let's have a practice in this first session of working out what the view of this interpretation that you can see on the screen is. So you can pause it in a sec and then read through it and then just make some notes in your book or whatever you're writing on. Try and figure out what the view of this interpretation is. Not a source analysis. I don't want you to tell me is it reliable or useful. Just read it and then think, write down what is the view of this interpretation. This is somebody's view of what was going on in Germany. All right. In real life, we may get something like this and we'd have to, in the end, agree or disagree with this view. But for now, let's just start quite simple. So you're gonna press pause and have a little think about the view, and then I'm going to put some of my thoughts on the screen as well. Okay, so we pause now, have a little go, and then we'll see. Okay, so I believe the view of this interpretation is quite clear actually, and how we write this is very simple. So in red, you'll see how you're going to start it. So the view of interpretation 1 is that the damages and impact of World War I was the reason for the political chaos within Germany. Okay, so I've read that and I feel like this interpretation is that the reason why there was so much chaos in Germany was because of World War I. It was entirely the fault of World War I. Okay, so if we had another interpretation to look at for now, we could maybe see an opposite view. But for me, that's where we are. And then that's 1 or 2 of our marks. And this is a 4 marker. Sorry, I should have said earlier. It's a 4 marker. So then we need to do the second half of this question, which is to prove it, is to tell the examiner which bit of that made me think or made you think what you thought. And that goes like, I can tell this because it says, and then nice and easy, it's a quote. So I'm going to pick out the bit that says, in the face of such pressure, existing order virtually collapsed. The existing order being the monarchy or the king. So the bit that I've picked out to prove to me that the reason for this was World War I is importantly in the face of such pressure, the pressure of the war, both in the trenches and at home. So you can agree with me or disagree, doesn't really matter, as long as you have some evidence from this interpretation that helps prove what the view is. Okay? It's quite difficult without a bit more information, but it's just our first time of having a look at this and seeing what happens. Okay, so this comes in section B of the Germany paper. Actually, question 1 of the whole of paper 3 is an inference question, and that's a source. So we'll keep this here for now, and we'll just pretend it's a source, and we'll have a look at how this one might look. So it's a 4-marker as well, and you get that space to do that you can see on the screen now. Now you need to do 2 inferences in this question. So I'm going to give you 2, but the bit of the exam paper you can see on the screen is just the space for just 1 of them. So the question is, what can you infer from this source about Germany during World War I? Okay, so an inference is really, really important. This is not a source analysis question. Again, we're not trying to say if this source is useful and who made it and when was it made. None of that matters. An inference is where you read between the lines, where you read something and it makes you think a certain way. I don't know, for example, if I always say it in class, if I came to school in a helicopter and landed on the school field, you might infer that I was rich, all right, or a bit of a show-off, whatever. But no one said that to you, but you have made an inference. You've read between the lines that surely somebody who comes to school or comes to work in a helicopter or a Jaguar or a Mercedes, we could infer that they had a bit of money. Okay, so that's what an inference is. So again, pause and have a little go at this. Write it in your book. What I can infer, and then the detail in the source, very similar to that last task. We need to quote to prove the inference. Now try not to just lift out an obvious statement, okay? It's got to be an inference. It's got to be something that you read between the lines and you can work out, okay? So press pause, have a little go, and then I'll give you a couple of ideas that I think would be useful, okay? Right, okay, so hopefully you've had a good go at that. So the first thing we need to think about is, how do we write this? Just like the last one, it's very straightforward. We simply say, source A suggests that. And the first example I'm going to give you, Germany was in total chaos and was out of control. That sort of says that, but I don't think it says it explicitly. So my inference is that Germany is in absolute chaos. It's out of control. And I'm going to need a quote to back that up. So then I follow up in the bottom half, as you'll see. I can tell this because it says, and then I have to quote. It says the existing order had virtually collapsed. Okay, so again, I'm sort of similarly using from the interpretation, but in real life, this question will be nothing to do with the interpretations. It's just as we sort of start this course. But I have got a second inference, perhaps. Maybe you got the same one. Many Germans were ready for political change. So I'm inferring and reading between the lines a little bit that this couldn't have came at a better time. The people of Germany were ready. And the quote for that is, I would say, I can tell this because it says the rapid spread confirmed that people were attracted to the prospect of far-reaching change. So the rapid spread, that means it happened quickly. Things don't spread quickly, do they, if there's not enough support for it. So the fact that it says the rapid spread makes me think that actually there's a lot of people ready for this, and when it happens, they go for it. And they go for it in a big way. So there's 2 inferences. Perhaps you can have a little think about your own. Are they similar to mine? Now, the good thing about inferences is that it's what you interpret, it's what you feel, what you read between the lines. And as long as you can back it up with some evidence, then we're going to get some marks there for that. Okay, so we've sort of introduced 2 of the questions on the Germany paper. We'll look at this much more later. We'll do a walkthrough of paper 3 as well. But really, there's a similar technique there, isn't there? So source A suggests that, and then give your inference. I can tell this because it says. Similar to the view of interpretation 1 is, I can tell this because it says. Okay, so hopefully we're happy with that. A little bit of exam technique in there. And let's just finish this session off now by having a bit of a overview and a bit of a contents check of what's coming in the next sessions. Okay, so Republic, in your book or your paper or whatever it is you're writing on, can we make a little list of some keywords? And the first keyword is Republic. Hopefully you remember what this is from earlier on in this session, or certainly from Key Stage 3. A republic is a country without a king or queen. So a government, a democratically elected or chosen government. Okay, normally, unless it's a dictatorship, but we'll come to that later. All right. And these words too. So if you can fill in a definition of these words from what you think or what you can remember from earlier studies, I'll give you some time. Just press pause and fill in a definition for these words. If you need to look on the internet, you can have a little look as well, or try and do it off what you think. If you're wrong, doesn't matter, it's okay. Getting things wrong is really important, because then we'll learn from them. All right, and hopefully by now, after this session, you are very happy with what abdicate means. Okay, so I'll pause it, give a definition of these 5 key words, because they are going to play a massive part in our story. Okay, so abdicate means to step down, when a king or queen steps down from their role as the monarch. Okay, a government is the body that governs or rules the country, so makes the laws and things like that. So government is the group of people or bodies that run the country. It could be the education, health, military, whatever it is. All of those things together come under the word government, to govern the country. Okay. Third, the Reichstag. The Reichstag is the German parliament building. Okay, so we have the Houses of Parliament and Commons and Lords. Their parliament, where they sit and have their meetings, is called the Reichstag. Okay. Fourth, how did you get on with this one? A putsch. A putsch simply means a rebellion or a fight. A rebellion is better than fight, really. An attempted takeover. Okay, so we'll see some putschs in the very, very early part of this story. And then the main putsch we'll see in 1923 is the Munich Putsch, where Hitler attempts for the first time to take over Germany by force. All right, and then the last one, Dolchstoss. It literally just means to be stabbed in the back. All right, so many Germans felt they were stabbed in the back. It was awful. They were so shocked that they lost this war. They blamed Ebert and the politicians. And if you know a little bit more, you're thinking ahead a little bit, a lot of people who joined the Nazi party, they believe that it was the Jews, the Jewish people, business owners, they put pressure on Ebert to end the war because they were losing money. So that's part of where this hatred of the Jews might come from, is that they blame the Jews. They stabbed the German people in the back just to end the war because they were greedy and owned all the money and they were losing too much money, and all sorts of crazy notions like that. So Dolchstoss means we're stabbed in the back. It's the source of all anger as we go through the next 15 years. All right. So just to finish off then, let's do a little timeline of what's coming so we get a bit of an idea. We're going to go up to 1923 in this first section, really, of the Germany course. The course is split into 2. So we have the Weimar Republic years, and then we have the Nazi years. So from 1933 to the start of World War II, 1939, the Nazi years. The first half of the course is the Weimar Republic years. This new government, this new political body that's going to try and run the country following the end of World War I. Okay, so that goes 1919 to 1933. So if you want to draw this timeline, you can, how it is on the screen, or however you want. These are the main things we're going to meet over the next few sessions. All right, so in 1918, the revolution happened. I think we're happy with that. That's today's session. The Kaiser abdicates and the Armistice, the 11th of November, 11 o'clock, 1918. Okay, so then as 1919 approaches, so just a couple of months later, we officially set up the Weimar Republic. So we actually officially write a constitution, which we'll see about, the laws of this new country. That's set up early 1919. And then on the 1st of January, we'll have our Spartacist uprising, our first attack of the new Weimar Republic. So that didn't take long, did it, at all, really? So that's a left-wing, a communist uprising, probably inspired by Russia, who attempt to take over this new country in its infancy. It's only a few months old, remember, this new Weimar Republic. Then we'll do the Treaty of Versailles in June 1919. So the Treaty of Versailles is going to be where Germany have to sign this treaty. They have to agree that the war was their fault, and they'll be punished. And the punishment, as we'll see when we get onto that, is incredibly harsh and really forms the basis of the growth of the Nazi Party and the growth of the anger towards the Weimar Republic in Germany And really, you could argue that in 1933, the Treaty of Versailles certainly was a cause or a reason for the rise of the Nazis. Okay, so we need to keep all of this in our mind as we go forward. Okay, so 1920, the Nazi Party is set up, okay, officially. So they sort of start off as a group of guys in a pub just moaning about the Treaty of Versailles and how disgusting Dolchstoss was and lots of little things like that. It's just a small group of extreme right-wing men. I keep saying right-wing and left-wing. You'll get to know what I mean by that. It'll become very, very clear. And we'll say it all the time. You'll just know what that means. And then we have our second attempted rebellion or putsch. The Kapp putsch is another attempt to get rid of this government. In actual fact, the Kapp putsch, there's the suggestion they want to bring the monarch back. They want to bring Kaiser Willhelm II back. So that's going to be a right-wing rebellion. So when I asked you earlier what your thoughts were on Ebert and whether you think he's going to be able to do well or not, just from what we can see at the moment, it's been a tough start for old Ebert, hasn't it? So the Kapp putsch is going to happen in 1920 as well. Then 1921, we're going to see that Hitler becomes the leader of the Nazis. It's very interesting actually how that happens. Hitler is sent by the government, by Ebert's government, to spy on the Nazis. And actually, he really likes what he hears when he goes down to the pub to listen to what they're moaning about. He actually quite likes and agrees with what they're saying. So he joins the Nazi Party. And within a year, he's taken over. He becomes its leader. All right, then not a lot happens in 1922, but 1923 is a year of crisis. 3 massive things happen that really, in theory, should be the end of the Weimar Republic. So we have the invasion of the Ruhr, and we'll see that's where Germany failed to pay one of their compensation payments to the Allies that was agreed at Versailles. As a result of that, they go on strike, the workers, so Germany's not producing anything at all. No goods, no machinery, nothing. All factories are closed. So they then, inflation is when the price of goods goes up because there's nothing to buy. So supply and demand. Well, hyperinflation, if you know your Star Wars, hyperdrive is when they super speed into space. Hyperinflation is super speed price rises. Just to give you a little bit of a taste there, you know, you could be paying maybe 6 billion marks for an egg or a loaf of bread, something like that. So billion marks. People were getting paid in wheelbarrows of money of the value on one note might be 500 million marks. It became ridiculous, and obviously that's really bad. People starved and died, and people couldn't buy anything because the money was worthless. So this is a huge, huge thing to come, hyperinflation. And then, of course, as we've mentioned already briefly, the Munich Putsch, where Hitler believes that after everything that's happened so far, he thinks that people will support him. Following the French invasion and hyperinflation, he believes that in November of 1923, the people will get behind as he takes over and attempts to take over this government. In actual fact, it's a complete disaster, and Hitler ends up in jail. So this little session here has hopefully given you a good idea about what happened in Germany, what was going on after the war and how the war impacted on Germany, and introduce you to some of the key words. So abdicate, Dolchstoss, Reichstag, putsch, and gives you a bit of an idea. As we go forward into the next section, is Ebert is going to face his first crisis, the Spartacist uprising and the Kapp putsch. And then we'll get ourselves to 1923, where we see the Nazi Party take their first strike. Okay, so following this session, if you've got any questions, let me know. Hopefully you've got some decent notes and you've been able to pause or go back if you've missed things. And then we'll get on with the next section. All right, this lesson, of course, is on our website at www.stchistory.com. You'll obviously click on the Key Stage 4 section and then find Germany, and you'll see all the lessons in there, just as always. All right, and don't forget as well, there's a video section on there if you want to add some videos to this as well. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next session.